John Maynard Keynes, Essays in Persuasion, teaser, explore foresight on global economic collapse and revival. Almost a century ago, economist John Maynard Keynes penned a series of essays that opened a window into a pivotal era of economic thought. From the aftermath of World War I to visions of a prosperous future, these essays grappled with issues that continue to shape our global economy. And many of his predictions, such as those about the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles or about the lives of future generations, remain surprisingly relevant, some might say even prophetic. This blink explores how Keynes' economic philosophy evolved in response to the challenges of his time and continue to influence modern economic debates. It's also a journey through modern history, as Keynes' thoughts on war, peace, and prosperity echo in today's economic landscape. In the shadow of World War I, picture yourself in the grand halls of Versailles in the year 1919. World leaders have gathered alongside you to forge a peace treaty that will officially mark the end of World War I. The opulence of the surroundings stands in stark contrast to the devastation outside. Europe lies in shambles, its fields scarred by trenches, its population decimated. The war has claimed over 20 million lives and left economies in tatters. Amid this chaos, a young British economist named John Maynard Keynes takes his place at the negotiating table. At just 35, he's already a rising star in his field. As you watch him, you might notice his furrowed brow, his piercing gaze taking in the proceedings with growing concern. The war has reshaped more than just borders. It's fundamentally altered how nations interact, how economies function, and how people view the role of government. The old certainties of the gold standard and free trade have been shaken to their core. You're witnessing the birth of a new era, one where governments take a more active role in managing their economies. The war effort required unprecedented state intervention, from rationing to directing industry. Now, as peace dawns, the question looms: what role should the state play in the economy? Keynes is grappling with these questions in real time. His experiences at Versailles will lead him to write The Economic Consequences of the Peace, a scathing critique of the treaty that will catapult him to international fame. But why should you care about essays written a century ago? Well, the issues Keynes wrestled with, economic inequality, the balance between state intervention and free markets, international cooperation, are just as relevant today, and his insights can help you make sense of our current economic challenges. As we delve into Keynes' world in the sections ahead, you'll find that his insights aren't just dry economics. They're passionate arguments about how to build a better, more prosperous, more equal society. They're a window into a pivotal moment in history, one that shaped the world we live in today. The consequences of peace. As the ink dried on the Treaty of Versailles, Keynes felt a deep sense of unease. His concerns, articulated in The Economic Consequences of the Peace, would prove eerily prophetic. Keynes argued that the harsh reparations imposed on Germany were not just unfair, but dangerous. He foresaw that crippling Germany's economy would lead to resentment and instability. You might wonder, how did this play out? Fast forward to the 1930s. Struggling under the weight of reparations and economic collapse, Germany became fertile ground for extremism. The rise of fascism and the outbreak of World War II tragically validated Keynes' warnings. But Keynes's insights reach beyond his time to touch your world today. When you hear about international sanctions or war reparations in the news, you're witnessing the modern echoes of the issues Keynes grappled with. Consider the recent sanctions against Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. These measures aim to deter aggression, but they also risk pushing Russia into economic isolation and potentially greater hostility. It's a delicate balance that Keynes would have recognized all too well. Keynes' lesson was groundbreaking at the time, but seems all too familiar today. Economic policies have consequences far beyond balance sheets. They shape the destinies of nations and the lives of ordinary people. When you see images of protest or unrest in countries facing economic hardship, you're seeing the human cost of economic decisions. But Keynes wasn't a doomsayer. He believed in the power of intelligent economic policy to foster peace and prosperity. His ideas laid the groundwork for institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which aimed to promote global economic stability. Keynes's insights illuminated the complex interplay between economics and politics. So the next time you hear debates about trade agreements or foreign aid, remember Keynes's warning: economic decisions have profound human consequences. In essence, the economic consequences of the peace isn't just about the aftermath of World War I. It's a timeless reminder that true peace requires economic justice. In the face of contemporary challenges, from climate change to inequality, Keynes' work urges us to consider the long-term consequences of collective economic choices, reminding us that investing in economic justice pays dividends for everyone, and not just the few. Inflation and deflation. In the aftermath of World War I, the economic landscape was unrecognizable. The old certainties of the gold standard and limited government intervention were crumbling, along with European economies and infrastructure. Picture yourself in this post-war world, when governments had little control over their economies. The idea of a central bank actively managing inflation would have seemed completely alien to everyone at the time. When prices fluctuated wildly, the prevailing wisdom was to let the market correct itself, no matter the human cost. Keynes challenged this hands-off approach. He argued that governments should take an active role in managing inflation and deflation. This was a radical departure from the norm. Consider, for instance, Keynes' proposal for counter-cyclical spending. The idea that a government should spend more during economic downturns to stimulate the economy was revolutionary. At the time, the common practice was to cut spending during hard times, much like a household tightening its belt. But it was clear this just shrunk economies further. Keynes also introduced the concept of sticky wages, explaining why deflation could be so devastating. He showed that when prices fall, wages don't adjust downward easily, leading to widespread unemployment. This insight helped explain why simply waiting for markets to correct themselves could lead to prolonged suffering. These ideas emerged as colonial empires were unraveling, and feudal systems were giving way to modern nation-states. In this flux, Keynes provided a new framework for understanding national economies. You might take for granted the idea of inflation targets or interest rate adjustments, but in Keynes' time, these were groundbreaking concepts. The notion that a central bank could and should manage the money supply to influence inflation was a radical departure from the previous gold standard. Keynes' work on inflation and deflation laid the groundwork for modern monetary policy. When you hear about quantitative easing or fiscal stimulus today, you're witnessing the long-term impact of Keynes' innovative thinking. And his insights remind us that economic theories aren't set in stone. They evolve in response to real-world challenges. From digital currencies to global supply chain disruptions, innovative thinking can chart a path forward. The end of laissez-faire. In the early 20th century, the doctrine of laissez-faire capitalism, or the belief that markets should operate with minimal government interference, had reigned supreme for decades. In that time, the consequences of unchecked capitalism, from widespread dangerous working conditions to debtor's prison, were often brutal. And the devastation of the war and economic turmoil that followed further exposed the limitations of this hands-off approach. Keynes dared to challenge this orthodoxy. He argued that unregulated markets could lead to inefficiency, inequality, and instability. This was a radical idea at the time, akin to Galileo suggesting that the Earth orbited the Sun. Keynes wasn't calling for full-blown socialism. Instead, he envisioned a middle ground, a managed capitalism where the government would step in to correct market failures and promote the greater good. He argued that the state should take on tasks that are beyond the abilities of the individual, like controlling currency, directing investment, and adjusting the distribution of income and wealth. This new approach would pave the way for transformative policies across the Western world. In the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal embodied Keynesian principles, introducing Social Security, unemployment insurance, and large-scale public works projects. You can still see the legacy of these programs today when you drive on highways built during that era or receive a Social Security check. In the United Kingdom, Keynes' ideas influenced the creation of the welfare state after World War II. The National Health Service, established in 1948, revolutionized healthcare by making it free at the point of use for all citizens. When you visit a doctor in the UK today without paying directly, you're experiencing the long-term impact of this shift in thinking. France, too, embraced elements of Keynesian economics in its post-war reconstruction. The policy of indicative planning, where the government worked with businesses and labor unions to set economic goals, reflected Keynes' vision of managed capitalism. This approach helped fuel the Trente Glorieuses, 3 decades of rapid economic growth that transformed France into a modern industrial nation. Keynes's ideas also influenced the global economic order. The Bretton Woods system, which governed international finance for much of the post-war era, was partly inspired by his work. Even today, institutions like the International Monetary Fund reflect the belief that economic stability requires active management and international cooperation. Public works and employment. In the depths of the Great Depression, Keynes proposed an idea that seemed counterintuitive at the time. Governments should spend money to create jobs, even if it meant going into debt. This concept of public works as a tool for economic recovery would reshape how nations approach unemployment and economic downturns. Keynes argued that during recessions, when businesses weren't investing and consumers weren't spending, the government should step in to fill the gap. He famously suggested that even paying workers to dig holes and fill them up again would be better than doing nothing, as it would put money into people's pockets and stimulate the economy. You've likely seen the legacy of this thinking without realizing it. When you drive on an interstate highway in the United States or visit a national park, you're benefiting from public works projects inspired by Keynesian economics. But the impact of these programs goes far beyond roads and public spaces. Take the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA, in the United States. This Keynesian-inspired program put artists, writers, and performers to work. Some of America's most celebrated creatives, like Zora Neale Hurston, Jackson Pollock, and Willem de Kooning, were supported by WPA programs. These initiatives preserved and created art during a time of economic hardship, enriching American culture for generations to come. The Federal Writers Project, part of the WPA, even collected and preserved the oral histories of formerly enslaved people, creating an invaluable historical record. Similar programs existed in other countries too. In Mexico, the government sponsored muralists like Diego Rivera to create public art that still adorns buildings today. In the UK, the Council for the Encouragement of Music and the Arts was established during World War II and later evolved into the Arts Council, continuing to support British culture. But Keynes's influence extends far beyond public works projects. His ideas laid the foundation for modern social welfare states. For example, when you hear about Germany's comprehensive healthcare system, strong labor protections, and heavily subsidized education, you're seeing a modern interpretation of Keynesian ideals. The German model aims to provide a safety net that supports workers and helps stabilize the economy during downturns. A vision for future generations. As the world grappled with the Great Depression, Keynes dared to dream of a brighter future. His essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, painted a startlingly optimistic picture of life 100 years hence. As that future draws near, it's a timely moment to examine Keynes's vision and our progress towards it. Keynes boldly predicted that by 2030, the standard of living in progressive countries would be 4 to 8 times higher than in 1930. In many ways, he was right. If you're living in a developed nation, you likely enjoy comforts and technologies that would seem like science fiction to your great-grandparents. But Keynes' vision went beyond material wealth. He imagined a world where the struggle for subsistence would be solved. In this future, people would work just 15 hours a week, devoting the rest of their time to leisure and self-improvement. He believed that technological advancement would free humanity from the need for constant toil. As you reflect on your own work-life balance, you might find this prediction overly optimistic. While productivity has indeed soared, the 15-hour workweek remains elusive for most. Instead, many find themselves struggling to keep up in an increasingly complex economy. Yet, in some ways, we're inching towards Keynes's vision. The rise of remote work, flexible schedules, and discussions about 4-day workweeks suggest a growing recognition that there's more to life than endless labor. When you hear debates about universal basic income or see experiments with shorter working hours, you're witnessing attempts to realize aspects of Keynes's dream. However, Keynes's optimism comes with a caveat that resonates strongly today. He worried that we might struggle to find purpose in a world freed from economic necessity. As you scroll through social media or binge-watch the latest series, you may recognize the challenge of using leisure time meaningfully, a problem Keynes anticipated almost a century ago. Moreover, Keynes' vision of widespread prosperity remains far from reality for much of the world. Billions of people still struggle with basic economic security. The challenge of our time isn't just to advance further, but to ensure that the benefits of progress are shared more equitably. Climate change, a crisis Keynes couldn't have foreseen, adds another layer of complexity to our economic future. As you grapple with news of extreme weather events and debates about sustainable development, you're confronting a challenge that will shape the economic possibilities for generations to come. The main takeaway of this Blink to Essays in Persuasion by John Maynard Keynes is that from his warnings about the consequences of harsh peace treaties to his revolutionary ideas about government economic intervention, Keynes' work laid the foundation for modern economic policies and institutions. His vision of a future with reduced working hours and increased leisure time continues to influence debates about work-life balance and universal basic income. He urges us to consider the long-term consequences of economic decisions and to strive for a more equitable distribution of prosperity. Understanding these ideas provides valuable context for navigating the complex economic landscape of the 21st century and beyond. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.